Welcome everyone. My name is Paridhi and I'll be moderating today. So as you're joining us, we're just gonna give everyone a minute to get on. Let us know where you're from. So tell us in the chat whereabouts in Australia are you joining us from, or if you're not in Australia, which country you're from. And we'll just give everyone a minute or so to hop on before we get started. And then we'll be introducing the panelists and getting into today's questions. So are we starting to see any responses again? No one's keen to tell us where they're from? Okay, that's too bad. All right, guys, I'm gonna get kick started because it's 2:01. So firstly, my name is Paridhi and I am here on behalf of Stone & Chalk. So I work at Stone & Chalk as their programs manager there. And today I'll be moderating today's panel. Now, before I start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of Australia and their continued connection to the land, waterways and communities, and to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, I want to thank you all so much for being here and welcome you into this space. I know it's been a really challenging couple of weeks for a lot of business owners. And so we really wanted to put this on. We've got some amazing speakers on today to help you make a little bit of sense of, is there a feedback? Is that just me? To help you make a little bit of sense of the current situation and what you can be doing in your businesses to survive and thrive in this kind of time, as a lot of us are kind of feeling like we're about to head into a recession. So for a lot of business owners, it's their first time dealing with this situation of running a business in a recession type environment. And definitely the circumstances of today's environment are very, very unprecedented, if I can use that very overused word. And so that's the context behind today's session. Now, we are hosting this event today in partnership with Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, a really valuable partner and resource for our residents at Stone & Chalk, and that our residents have access to their strategic initiative, the CA Catalyst program. So we're really, really pleased to be partnering with Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand on this particular event. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. There will be replays made available to CAs in the CA Catalyst community in MyCA. And for other community members, we will be looking to distribute that in the next week or so, the recording for you to watch as a replay. So if you have any issues with sound or internet, we are recording this and we will make that available in the future. Now, I do need to also say that today we are not giving any financial advice. So the conversation really is just around gaining insights and information. And the panelists will be sharing their experiences, what they're seeing, and some tips and strategies. But you obviously have to make sense for yourself the extent to which it's applicable to your situation. So I'm going to turn now to each of the panelists, and I'm going to get you guys to wave as I call your name so we know who you are. So Matt Prouse, Head of Industry at Xero. Matt helps connect government agencies, policymakers, accountants, bookkeepers, business owners, and software developers to the digital economy. And prior to joining Xero 6 years ago, Matt spent 8 years as an accountant in public practice in Western Australia. And he's currently really in the heat of what's going on at the moment. So he's been really buried into the depths of it. So really keen to hear some of his perspectives. Josh, give us a quick wave. Josh leads HLB Mann Judd tax division. Sorry for butchering that. Josh has 16 years of tax experience and has advised clients across all sectors and sizes, from startups all the way to foreign government funds. And outside of HLB, Josh is a board member and treasurer of the Property Funds Association of Australia and the board member and vice treasurer of the Australia-Malaysia Business Council. So Josh has a huge amount of expertise in tax. So we will be talking a little bit about the government stimulus today and how it may apply to your business. So really looking forward to hearing what Josh has to say on that as well. Now, Tim Lee, give us a quick wave, founder of Fractonium. He has 20 years of professional careers experience in corporate funding, lending with such names like GE Capital, HSBC, and Lloyds Bank. And as he's actually run a business through two recessions, once as a lender and secondly as an entrepreneur. And so he's really seen the challenges firsthand. And what I'm really keen to hear from him today is some of his experiences being an entrepreneur through the good times and the bad, and what he would say. He's obviously still an entrepreneur, and what he's doing in his business to navigate this environment. So I'm going to get stuck into the questions for today, a lot of which has been designed around some of the questions that you guys submitted on your registration. And we will also be leaving time at the end for some questions, but feel free to keep those questions coming in throughout. We do have a team supporting us, putting those together, and I'll be keeping an eye on those as we progress. So if they're relevant to what we're doing right now, I'll definitely pull them out. Otherwise, we'll try and get to them at the end. Now, a lot has happened in the last few weeks, and a part of what's driving real uncertainty for a lot of businesses is just the scale of economic impact, right? So even as far as recessions go, we're in pretty uncharted territory with this pandemic. And look, no one has a crystal ball, but I want to get a sense of how you, the panelists, as professionals and business owners, are thinking about what the next 6 months looks like for your clients and for your businesses. So Matt, I might start with you and then get an opinion from Josh and Tim as well. Can you share a little bit about what you're anticipating for the next 6 months and how you're preparing for it?
I can. Just as a big caveat, I'm here to sort of talk about the impacts of COVID-19, and which is the health emergency, and the economic impacts in Australia and New Zealand. I'm not going to speak or comment on Xero Limited in any way, shape or form. So I have the pleasure of working for a listed company, but I won't be talking about the listed company's response to anything. In response to what we've got today, or where we're at today, it probably helps to go back just a couple of months and sort of think about the world that we had in 1 January. What we're facing, we use words like unprecedented and unpredictable. This is that black swan moment. But essentially, a health emergency that began in early January has triggered a series of economic events that have spread globally, almost in line with the virus, that will produce some uneven economic results long term. So in that sort of 12 to 24 month process, and it has impacted different parts of the world and different parts of the economy unevenly. Now, here in Australia, in response to the initial health emergency, policymakers have taken a range of strategic measures designed to contain the health emergency. And they've had some impacts on both demand inside the economy, effectively put the economy into hibernation for a period of time, but also triggered a set of policy responses that are there to effectively help business, help taxpayers, help employees sort of hibernate for a 6-12 month period whilst the health crisis or the health emergency is resolved so that the economies can emerge. So we kind of want to sort of think about these two moments. What did the business economy, what did the Australian economy look like on 1 March, which wasn't actually that long ago. It feels like about 3 decades ago today, but the 1st of March was not that long ago. It was broadly less than 2 months ago. The economy that we had there was growing slowly. It had different degrees of digitization. In the case of Australia and New Zealand, there are about 3 million businesses operating. Our significant major trading partners were, New Zealand, China, ASEAN, and the United States. And there was a thriving, broadly small business economy with low unemployment. That's the world that we had on the 1st of March. We also had varying degrees of digital literacy. So most of our trade, most of our exports were either education or physical goods. We're now going to endure the long, dark winter, and I kind of feel a bit like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, sort of with that kind of language of winter is coming. But we're going to endure this long, dark winter through this sort of economic and health-induced slowdown. And then we're going to have this spring in October, and the kind of businesses that are going to emerge in October as spring comes, as we get a little bit further along the health journey, as we get a little bit further along the economic journey, those businesses are going to look radically different to the ones that were there on the 1st of March. So there's no going back to where we were on the 1st of March. The future we're facing is going to be far more digitally native, far more digitally literate, and we're going to be exporting a whole lot of different things. We're going to be exporting digital goods, digital trade to the rest of the world first. And also we're going to see that parts of the world will recover from this economically first or faster. We're going to see that in Asia, in particular. Asia was pulled into this earlier. They're going to come out of this earlier. So the business opportunities are going to pivot and change as well. And that's sort of the start of this. Probably the last thing is it takes people 28 days to form a new habit. I've been self-isolating or isolating on my balcony here in Melbourne for the last 6 weeks, along with my wife. Most of Xero globally is actually working from home and has been for several months now. Think of all the new habits you're forming and think about those opportunities that those new habits that we have now, video conferencing being the obvious one, but there's a range of others that we're going to accept and build upon. And by the way, we've got another 6 months of this. That's 3 or 4 more iterations of new habits and new opportunities. So if you think of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for businesses and for individuals, yes, we've probably moved a couple of steps down the pyramid for now, particularly for those businesses that are gravely impacted by the economic slowdown. But it was going to create some new opportunities and some new spaces for green shoots going forward. And I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's a really nice kind of capture of the journey that we've been on since 1st of March, which definitely does feel like it was about 3 decades ago. Josh, what about you? What are you seeing in terms of your clients and how are you talking to them about what the next 6 months looks like? Oh, I can't hear you. I think you might be on mute.
Oh, thanks, Paridhi. Yeah, rookie mistake. So I'll give you my lens as a chartered accountant, and also because we've got that sort of audience here as well. Matt is 100% right. This is a health crisis, and the reason for me that's important is because before March, and we really got impacted by COVID-19, the health of the global economy in Australia was actually really humming along really nicely. This event is not a financial crisis. It's not a tech bubble. It's not driven by war. So what really fundamentally happened is a health pandemic has made us all retract into our homes and then try and survive during this hibernation period. And the reason that for me that's important is because we know that we will survive through this. Obviously there's a lot of businesses out there struggling. I think if you were an unhealthy business to start off with, business-wise, I think you would really struggle. But we have a lot of clients that have a long sustainable track record of doing business, and now they're just going to obviously get a bit more leaner, sort of work through this period and build back up. And so what is really happening is a lot of people are sort of shedding weight, sort of getting rid of access, discretionary spend, sort of retracting their sort of resourcing. But at least from my perspective as a chartered accountant, as a consultant, looking from the GFC perspective, for an example, we will have a rebound. It's a question of when, and it's a question of how quick, but we will have a rebound. And when it does rebound, because we all can go back out and they've solved this health pandemic and everyone's got a lot more confidence, then there's going to be the need for all the talent that's currently obviously laying low a little bit more to come back in to support. So certainly from my perspective, working with clients, obviously, they're successful for a reason. A lot of my clients know their business. So it's really just helping them financially to restructure, get the right government incentives, which we'll talk about, get them to get through this period. And then hopefully then as they need to revise their business model for this new world, and this new world, again, like Matt was saying, is very digitally connected now. And in many respects, it's really done a lot of good, at least for myself as a chartered accountant, because it's forced myself, my team, our firm to do stuff that we should have been doing, which is to be a lot more flexible, which is to be a lot more integrated through the technology with chat and video, to use the cloud. So really, we've built a lot of really good skills, more advanced digital skills. And I'm busier than ever because you have a lot more interaction now with your clients. And I actually feel more engaged with some of my clients and my team, just because we've adjusted to this new way of using the technology as it should. When we are able to go back and the health crisis dissipates, it's also going to be very different, because I know if one of my team members says, Josh, actually, is it okay if I just work 2 days at home, 3 days in the office? I'd be going, that's completely fine, because they're actually fully at home now, fully working, and there's the technology. So, and it's also been really good for me, for example, as a business owner, because now I get to see my kids every day. Sometimes otherwise I'd be in the office and I miss out on certain things. So it's actually forced us to, yes, get through a bit of pain because of this health crisis, but it's going to force us to learn new skills. It's going to hopefully learn us to be more empathetic. Our clients will get through this. So it's from that perspective, we will get through it. It will rebound. And for me, it's just not helping my clients just get through this period, and we'll come back out.
Yeah, it does sound like, from a CA's perspective, part of what's important in your role is being that support during this kind of time where, that there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just kind of holding your client's hand through that dark tunnel for however long it goes for that period of time. So I think those are some really great points. And Tim, I did want to get your thoughts as well as more of an entrepreneur on that lens. How are you thinking about preparation for the next 6 months as a business owner?
It's a very expansive question, I think, overall. I mean, it's driven very much by the health side of things, certainly in the immediate term. But there are also other issues that are happening. You've got major crisis in the oil industry right now, which is causing all sorts of geopolitical shifts as well. So from a macro level, we're getting some really really difficult things actually happening. And so where we are in this next 6 months is going to be predicated on the health. I mean, when can we actually get back out, if we can get back out? And I mean, there's always the concern of second waves and third waves coming, which is always a very major concern until we get the vaccine. So I think everything is going to be predicated on the health side, first of all. My deeper concern overall is what's going to happen to the financial markets and what's going to happen to other markets. Now, I never want to try and talk ourselves into a recession. I mean, I've been through 2 recessions, and prior to a recession, everybody talks themselves into a recession, and it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the reality is that there are lots of things happening in markets that are not good. Now, what does that mean for everybody? I think exactly as both Matt and Josh were saying, it's all about being flexible. It's all about looking at where the actual opportunities are, looking at what companies actually need now rather than what they want in terms of solving pain points. And certainly, we've found a number of the clients that we've been talking to, have postponed contracts and, are waiting to see how things pan out. And I think, through recessions over the years, when recessions happen, everybody becomes inward focused. And that is both a challenge and an opportunity, because I've noticed, again, through 2 recessions that I've been through, that people cut back on advertising and marketing. It's the first thing that goes. Quite rightly, as both Josh and Matt were talking about, discretionary spend goes. But I think now is the opportunity to actually get out there and market yourself, because the costs of marketing through social media and through other outlets are significantly cheaper than they've ever been. And more often than not, from an entrepreneurial point of view, it's about leveraging your time. Because at the end of the day, all of us have got a lot more surplus time because the markets are a bit softer. I mean, I appreciate Matt won't have, because he's involved in a lot of really exciting stuff. But if one can actually leverage your own expertise and actually put out content and actually promote yourself or your business throughout this challenging time, this really bad time that we're in right now will end. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know how long that tunnel is and how big that pinprick of light is. But it will end, and there will be new models that will come out of this. And I think those that promote themselves now will be in the ideal opportunity to come out at the back end.
And can you expand a little bit more on, you've mentioned a couple of times that you actually ran a business through a recession earlier in your life. So can you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like, and what were some of the learnings that kind of came out of it for you, and what were some of the strategies that you had to deploy?
Well, I think the key thing, I think, comes down to 3 primary issues when you're running a business in recessionary times, let's call it that. Number 1 is cash. Cash is king. Businesses don't go bust because of a lack of profit, although ultimately they will, but it's a lack of cash, right? So, when you're actually sort of heading into recessionary times, number 1, you've got to be focused on the cash, like it's the most important thing you have to focus on. And sometimes in your planning for your cash and your cash flow, you have to look at your overheads, you have to look at the sales are going to come through, and you have to make some difficult decisions. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to manage through these processes, but if you don't look at where your cash is going to be in 3, 6, 12, 18 months, you can't possibly assess if your business is going to survive. And if you need to make those unpalatable decisions, make them quickly. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is all about sales, right? Expect revenues to fall. That's the reality. When recessions happen, innovation is the last thing that companies are thinking about, as I said earlier, because they tend to focus on what's going on within the business and looking at how they can preserve cash and preserve what they've got. So expect existing customers, the revenues from existing customers to slow. Expect new contracts to be a lot harder to get, and that's where it's really important to look at the third thing that I would say, which is flexibility. It's the age-old thing in sales that if a client says jump, you say how high, right? And if you're in an environment where customers are not spending money, you've got to look at areas where they are spending money. And it's about being flexible in your business model as much as possible to be able to move into new opportunities as quickly as you can safely and realistically do. So for example, there are lots of examples of, say, alcohol producers who've moved into sanitizing solutions, for example. Now that's a classic case where, there's a major pain point that exists in terms of sanitizing solutions, and how can an existing business, link into that? And that's what, some companies are successfully doing. I've just written an article on this and looked at a bit of sort of commentary from Darwin, who, he's often attributed with the idea of it's about sort of survival of the fittest. And that's actually not the right quote that Darwin actually made. He said it's more about those who adapt most effectively, to survive and that type of thing. And I think we have to look at it like that. This is a sort of a Maslowian type of idea where the very heart of most businesses is under threat. And so I would come back to the three key things of cash flow, sales, and flexibility.
Yeah, and I do want to deep dive a little bit later on that last bit of flexibility, because I think, there is real opportunity for businesses, not just to survive, but to thrive if they do tap into the right markets or pivot in the right way. So we will come back to that in a little bit. But now I want to kind of draw on something that you mentioned on the importance of cash. Now, we have some startups on the call today and potentially some of our Stone and Chalk residents. And the reality is that for a lot of startups, cash isn't really particularly plentiful in the early days of a business, and especially if they're still in product development phase and they don't have a lot of revenue. So Josh, is that something that you've seen in your clients? What do you do if you're a business that doesn't have the luxury of a lot of cash? They're low on cash, revenue is drying up. What can you do?
I'll give my perspective. So firstly, you kind of have to look at, well, you do a scenario analysis. Okay. So look at your fixed costs, variable costs, and kind of go, well, based on my revenue drop, if it drops 50%, 70%, really arguably, how much sort of runway do you have before you're going to have to run out of cash? Then you look at all your existing spend, cut back on obviously discretionary. This is the time to sort of build a relationship with suppliers, because what I also want to make clear is everyone is in the same boat. So sometimes a lot of my clients will talk to me and they feel frustrated because they're going, oh my God, it's all coming to an end. But I'm going, everyone's in the same bucket, right? And it's in everyone's interest to get through this period. So then you kind of look at, okay, well, if there's, certain fixed contracts with where you are a tenant or with your suppliers, then you sort of have to have the conversations. You got to look at your, I guess, employment is a big cost for a lot of people. So you got to make a strategic call. Do I cut certain people off because they're not going to be core for the future, or do I ask everyone to take a hit? And again, from a cash perspective, and maybe I'll share it as a chartered accounting experience. Back in the GFC, which is similar in the sense of a big dip in the economy, a lot of firms made the choice to make a lot of team members redundant. Okay, so they kind of said, well, we'll cut 10% off the workforce because we need to cut costs. strategically, what happened though was later on when the economy moved back, then there was a lot of talent that was missing when the economy moved back. So really, a lot of accounting firms now are doing their best to keep their staff as a strategic choice rather than manage those costs. So, I mean, the main thing is for the business owners to look at what they can control, and then whatever the government supports, I guess, is really a supplement. Okay, it really should be the basis of why you would be surviving. Otherwise, you'd be in real trouble. But right now, like Tim said, it's just a fight for survival in the first phase. Looking at all the costs and retracting your business model. And that's kind of, honestly, it's kind of on a spreadsheet. And then it's cash flow. So cash flow in terms of how much cash you have, when you're going to get the cash in, and sort of it's almost a day-to-day proposition. That's what I'm seeing with a lot of businesses right now. Once you get to a certain point where you're kind of going, oh, we think we're okay. We've really modeled the worst case scenario, and we think we're going to be okay. You know, that's a good space to be, because that's when you can have breathing space to think about, well, how do we pivot or adjust accordingly? So
it does sound like one of the things that I got from what you said is something that's really important to do is the scenario planning, like run the numbers. And I think a lot of people often, and you know, I see this in my work as well, because I run financial education programs, and so you see people, you know, they kind of come in with a lot of panic, and the emotion is kind of at the forefront, and they're really scared. And if you kind of just peel that away and do the numbers and get it on paper, then you've got something tangible to work with in terms of what are the options and what are the different strategies that you've got available to you. So I think that's a really valuable takeaway for people, is to do the numbers, do the scenario planning, and that's going to give you a lot more clarity and visibility of what's going on and what are the options that are available to you. So I think that's a great tip. So Matt, I wanted to ask you, you know, you mentioned something earlier in one of our calls previously, that it's sometimes okay to kind of close up shop, right? And not everyone is going to come out of this with a business that survived. And, you know, that's not a nice thing to think about, but that may be a reality for some people. When do you know if it's time to maybe close up shop or move on to the next business idea?
So I think that is a fair point. And I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you think of the narrative of your business journey, if you're in a business that is not going to recover, and I think that's one of the things to call out, a business that was failing or that was facing significant challenges on the 1st of February or the 1st of March, those challenges haven't gone away. So if the course the business was on was not the one the founders and the entrepreneurs or the investors wanted to take it, now is probably the best time. No one will judge you right now if your business fades off into the sunset, or if this business, this project, this problem fades off into the sunset. We've seen it recently with, you know, the second largest airline in Australia going into administration voluntarily and quite quickly. We're seeing that around the world with Chapter 11 for a range of other exposed industries. If we think of New Zealand, we've had significant publishers of publications like the Woman's Weekly shut their doors. The excuse they've given is coronavirus. The reality is coronavirus didn't hit that quickly that it would take out all of effectively the magazine business in New Zealand overnight. So fundamentally, it is okay right now to have that moment and go, you know what, this isn't going to work out. Or I have a sense that this is not the right business for the climate that's going to exist in 6 months' time. So if the problem you're solving is not going to be a real problem in October, November, 2021 and forwards, now is the time to kind of go, I need help. And there are a range of options other than effectively shut up shop, go bankrupt, wipe out everything. There are a range of steps between I don't think the business is on track through to I need to terminate this or I need to put the business down. And all of it starts exactly with understanding and running those numbers. And I'd say even further, those numbers are, we're in the age now of daily bookkeeping or daily accounting. If you're the financial controller in a business, this is not something you can sweep under the carpet. This is not something that you can leave to end of month or end of quarter. If you're a chartered accountant on this call, you are that trusted advisor. You are the the firefighter, for lack of a better term, or the counselor supporting these customers, your engagement with those clients, with your customers, needs to move to weekly or daily in some cases. You cannot provide the support and the assistance that you need and that your clients need right now, ringing them monthly or ringing them quarterly. You need to be far more involved in those relationships with those clients and those customers today and on an ongoing basis. And that means there's going to be some hard decisions in accounting firms too, around which clients they can support and how that looks in a fee structure and how that looks commercially, because accounting practices are businesses too, and they're seeing that change in revenue. Another way to look at it, for a lot of accountants, compliance has been the core of their business. It's 70% of their revenue, and that value-added advisory was sort of the sugar on top, the extra fee services that they would on-sell on top of their baseline compliance work. What we're seeing and what we're hearing from accountants and bookkeepers around the world, one, that advisory service has gone from being a nice to have to a must-have, and in some cases, it's the part that's for free, and the compliance is still being billed for, and that's a real change and a pivot in the industry as well.
Those such like valuable points, and I just want to hammer some of that home. Is I totally agree that it's okay to close up shop, and I think one of the really valuable things, the mindsets to have is, I don't actually ever see a failure of a business as a failure. I don't even like to kind of use that word, because it's kind of an opportunity. Sometimes it's an opportunity for the founders to go create something else, or sometimes it's an opportunity to go in a different direction in your life, or sometimes, you find whenever that kind of cliche saying, when one door closes, another one opens, but you kind of got to close the door for the other one to open. And so I think it's a really valuable takeaway, Matt, to be okay if you're coming to that point, or if you're a CA supporting businesses on that journey, to have that conversation, to go, could this be an opportunity to try something new, to go in a different direction? And that's totally okay. Now, Tim, I actually wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, as a serial entrepreneur yourself. So, the idea of closing shop or, changing directions can feel quite a struggle for a lot of people. And sometimes what we see is founders hanging on for too long and not knowing when to let go. So what advice might you have for knowing when you should pivot or let go or try something new, and coming to terms with that?
It's very specific to individual cases. Obviously, I'll try and paint a generic picture, I guess. It's all about what clients are prepared to pay for. It all comes back to cash and revenues. If your clients are saying, I don't want this service, but I might be able to do X, Y, and Z, you've got to face those decisions to either iterate in terms of, readapting the business model, or to pivoting. It's because if the existing business model is broken, is it likely to be sustained after the COVID crisis has gone? And it's a very, very tough call to make. And I absolutely agree with Matt. At the end of the day, you've got to take those tough decisions if it's just not going to work, and it's painful as hell, to actually make those calls. But you have to. And there are, sort of certain provisions that are out there if the actual underlying business still has value. When I lent during the recession, there was there were a number of cases where we were getting involved in funding difficult situations, I think it's fair to say. And there were a number of customers that actually went into the sort of the equivalent of Chapter 11 in the States. It's called a deed of company arrangement, or a corporate voluntary arrangement in the UK. Now, I'm not a lawyer, or a financial any financial advice, but it's the idea that you can actually freeze the business in a legal sense. And if you've got all those creditors that are building up and trying to knock the door down and trying to, make you go bankrupt and that type of thing, there are means of actually, slowing that process and looking at freezing historic debts and then, continuing the business on, if the business makes sense. And I think that's the hardest call to make. Does the business make sense? And I think in many ways, I would actually suggest to most startups that they talk to somebody, get a mentor on board to actually help with those decisions. Because when you've been through a recession, and I've earned these gray hairs, trust me, it's one of those things that you can at least get a sense of, where do I need to go with this? And if, and somebody who's objective to your business can actually cut through the emotional heartstrings that might be being pulled. You might have founders that you've worked with for 3 or 4 years. You might have people who've come on to your business, really fired up by your passion and enthusiasm. And, sometimes you can't make those hard decisions. If you have somebody that's objective to the business, they can say, you know what, that looks like it might be good. That area is not so good. Or at worst saying, look, realistically speaking, you've got revenues that were falling prior to coming to this crisis. People are not taking the product up. When's it going to change? Have you got real line of sight of that? If you haven't, then you've got to make that decision to pull. So it's such a difficult thing to give a blanket answer to. But I think, it's about, if you can't answer the question yourself, just get a second opinion from just a mentor, or get introduced. I mean, Sterling Chalk have a lot of mentors that can sort of help, or talk to your accountant who will be, who will just give you that objective advice. But get somebody objective to the business is what I would say.
And just a fun fact, I just texted one of my colleagues who used to be a ministerial policy advisor. During the GFC last time in Australia, 15% of businesses disappeared. So the last time we had an event like this, 15% of businesses exited. However, when it ended, effectively all of those businesses, or the equivalent number of businesses, came back within a 3-month period. So this is expected. This is the cycle of creative destruction.
I think, Tim had some really great points there around getting a mentor. And one other thing that I noted is a lot of the comments that all 3 panelists have made is really about being entrepreneurial, right? Like sometimes we see that entrepreneurs come in and they've gotten a little bit wedded to the idea that they've got. And then when the situation changes, they're still a little bit wedded to that idea. And like, this is what our business is, and this is what our business does. But, in kind of environments like this, you kind of, like Tim said, have to see where's the money going. And if your clients are asking for something different, then maybe suddenly that's what you do now. You used to be an alcohol business and now you're a sanitizer business, and that's okay. You got to roll with the punches and not get too wedded to things at the moment, because you've just got to make it through. And then, hey, like I'm sure like in 9 months, 12 months, you can go back to being your alcohol business, but you've got to roll with the punches and do what you need to survive right now. So that might mean being entrepreneurial and trying alternative revenue streams that you may not have originally thought of or wanted to go down. So those are some great tips. I do want to get a little bit more practical with the government stimulus. So that's obviously one of the ways that businesses can support themselves at the moment. Josh, can you briefly kind of outline what is available, who's eligible, and what do you need to think about as a business before you register or go ahead with this?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I think everyone's aware, I mean, the title for this event was $130 billion, what's your cut? And that was a bit of a teaser to the fact that we're right in the middle of the JobKeeper payment, which I'm going to assume everyone's aware of it. You can't not be aware of it, right? It's $130 billion. That's equivalent of paying apparently half of Australia's wage bill for the next 6 months. It had 800,000 businesses registered their interest, and we're right in the middle of all these businesses applying. So it's not a real time at the moment, but it's really the government's way of saying, we get it, we've made you all retract and you can't do your business normally, so we're going to help, I guess, keep you going by subsidizing the cost of your employees for the next 6 months, assuming, very broadly speaking, your business has dropped by 30%. And it's available for basically every type of business, whether you're structured as a company, trust, or a partnership. And I'm talking about, and it even applies for multinationals that turn over $1 billion, but then their Australian businesses need to drop by 50%. So for startups, that effectively is an avenue for them to help fund their fixed costs of their employees for the next 6 months. I mean, you still needed to show a drop in revenue So you needed to, so for the startup community, you need to have shown revenue before basically COVID-19. And really the period now is people are applying now by demonstrating, can they show that they've had a drop basically from March onwards due to COVID-19, due to having to close access to their products or not getting the supplies that they need. So I guess a couple of initial comments around the JobKeeper payment. An incredible effort by the government and the tax office, okay, to really put this into law in lightning speed, which as a chartered accountant gives me some confidence that when we get through this, the government's going to have the confidence to do proper tax reform that it's always supposed to have done. We haven't really had proper tax reform since GST. So, and they're already starting to talk about how do we make Australia more competitive once we get out of this period. The company tax rate needs to drop. So, and so the other interesting concept is it's all administered through the tax office, right? So the tax office is kind of come from taking everyone's money. Now they're sort of Santa Claus, they're giving everyone money until the 6-month period ends, and then they'll probably come back and get their money again. So, but what I wanted to say for that is because they've made the process really simple. It's an online application. You can go through your tax agent, you can go through yourself through the business portal, but the questions are really simple, okay? There's some complexity, some misconceptions, just so for those that have been thinking about it. One misconception is it's a benefit for the employee. No, it is, but it's really the benefit for the business owners to subsidize the costs for the employees. The employees effectively will be on the same package. Unless the other common misconception is you can pick and choose which employees you want to put in. And the reason some people go, oh, geez, I don't want to pick and choose, I don't want to put everyone in, is because some of the employees might be getting paid less than $1,500 a fortnight, which is currently the JobKeeper payment. Okay, so just to be aware that if you want to apply, it's for all your eligible employees, and if you've got some employees that get paid less than $1,500 a fortnight, you actually need to top them up to $1,500 for the month of April, and the government will then in May pay you back. Okay, so there might be just a cash flow thing that you need to monitor. And the other thing I think, especially for startups, this concept of drop of turnover to test your eligibility, there's a very basic way of testing it, which is this year versus last year. But then there's a lot of companies or businesses in different scenarios, again, because they're starting up. So they've got exceptional growth. So it's not right to compare to last year, or they're less than a 12-year-old business. So just today, the government has put into law alternative ways to test your drop in turnover by putting a different 7 buckets of different classes of businesses that might be able to classify. Again, for example, if you were less than 12 months old, but you had some revenue, so you can't compare to last year. If you're scaling up really quick, or if you made an acquisition last year. So it's a really evolving landscape. But what I would also say is a lot of new information is getting released every day. And so my job as an accountant is I got people asking me very direct questions, and obviously I don't have the answer, but I do have the core principles. The core principle is, have you had a drop in business? Are you an eligible business? Are you likely to sort of lose some of your staff if you don't get these payments? That gives me a framework to go out, well, broadly, should you be eligible while we wait for the details? So so right now, JobKeeper is live. And the other thing I just want to say is it's for 6 months. Okay, so if you can evidence your drop in turnover, then you're kind of effectively qualified for the next 6 months of being subsidized for your employees. You don't have to retest unless you've done something to manipulate your numbers, which the ATO can always check again. But I would also say, because COVID-19 is so new, a lot of businesses still don't have strong data about how much their business has dropped, because they still have some carryover over revenue or momentum from March or even April. Okay, so if you might not qualify to get subsidized back for for April, for example, or even May, you can still, if you're a business owner or founder, you can still apply later on if your business really does show the evidence of drop, to then still maybe get 4 out of the 6 months of the JobKeeper for your employees. So I just want to focus more on the JobKeeper, because there's other ones, but the JobKeeper is the one where you have to actually apply. There was another cash flow boost that's already been in place, which is automatic based on how you lodge your activity statement. So it's a very interesting space at the moment, but and there's a lot of to be honest, a lot of uncertainty in business owners trying to qualify, and the ATO understands that. So you kind of have to just be quite reasonable in your application, and work through with your accountant.
Awesome. That was a really great overview, very comprehensive. Thank you, Josh. So Mann, you've also been in the kind of the mix, the heat of this. What are some of the common errors, misconceptions and mistakes that people are making, or a lot of the really frequent questions that you're seeing that you could just touch on?
Okay, so the other thing I want to touch on, and Josh, that was a great summary for JobKeeper, and believe me, I've certainly heard a few in the last few weeks. JobKeeper is the biggest change to small business since the introduction of GST 20 years ago. Unlike GST, where the profession and software industry had 18 months to prepare for GST, we've had 18 days to prepare for JobKeeper. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's pretty good. The one thing that's also clear alongside the core principles of JobKeeper, and this is the bit that a lot of people forget, is the obligations of JobKeeper are also clear. The first one is that businesses need to continue to lodge. They need to continue to submit and lodge their activity statements on time. They need to continue to submit and lodge their tax returns on time. So those taxpayer obligations are still real. Now, lodgement is not payment. So send the forms in, get the forms lodged. That's really, really important. The second thing is, once a business is eligible for JobKeeper and has enrolled, they have a requirement to report their business activity outside of activity statements. So instead of, on top of their business activity statements and the tax returns on a monthly basis. And the first one of those reporting periods is going to be starting on the 4th of May. So on the 4th of May, every business that's on JobKeeper will be required to access the business portal and effectively sign a declaration reporting their income for the previous month, their estimated income for the next month, and confirming their list of eligible employees. That's the other thing to kind of prepare for. It'll only take 4 or 5 minutes, but you will need to do that every month. And once you've done that, effectively the payments will start 2 to 3 days later. Now for the first one, which will start on the 4th of May, businesses will probably have 3 weeks to kind of submit that declaration. But on the going forward basis, so in June, it's probably going to be a few days. So from like the 4th of June to about the 12th of June, it's going to be a really compressed period, which means you're going to have to stay on top of your numbers throughout winter.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That was a really great addition to what Josh had shared. Now, Josh, I just want to go back. I know we have a lot of CAs on the call. So what should CAs be doing right now to be helping their clients and their community?
I think being a CA right now is super challenging just on a day-to-day basis. But what I've really found, and this is my perspective because I can't say I'm the gold standard, but what I've found is a lot of clients are leading on us, like Matt is saying, you need to be talking to them almost every day, because it's almost like it's just them hearing your voice to give you some reassurances and updates about where things are at with government stimulus and sort of ideas to support their business makes an incredible difference. Now, most business owners are logical people. They're not going to panic, but they still would value the conversation, because I think the other thing as a chartered accountant is, I'm sure this resonates with a lot. I learn a lot from my clients and vice versa. They learn a lot from me, because my expertise might be accounting and tax, but they've got some commercial acumen that they will then share their perspective about what's going on. And really, because the more you talk with your community, the more you can share, I guess, what's consistent in their industry, for example, that you can just help relay. So I guess acting almost like as a counseling role rather than an accounting or technical advisor is, I think, really important. I think using the opportunity to challenge, for example, myself to step out and learn broader skill sets. Okay. So for example, I guess in Melbourne, I put my hand up to be able to help as the Stone and Chalk CA in residence through the CA Catalyst program. And the reason I did that again is because I genuinely feel like I learn as much from that community as I can impart on my sort of skill on tax planning, sort of structuring, et cetera, et cetera. It's a community thing. And I think if chartered accountants can sort of continue to develop that broader skill set, because we typically get to our senior position not based on that broader skill set. But I think that's going to show to be a lot more important, especially in this current environment when we're going to adjust to whatever this new normal is going to be, which we've touched on, which is going to be a very different workforce expectation, and we need to adjust. So those are a couple of tips. The technical stuff is there. It's just trying to, because what you also want to look back as an advisor is through this period, hopefully you can look back as a positive thing, that you've done the right thing by helping your clients through it. To Matt's point, yes, we're going to have difficult conversations with clients, or scenarios where we're kind of going, well, geez, how much investment do we want to make, because they might not have the money to pay us, right? But you've got to sort of help as much as you can. It's the community that we're building, because again, it's no one's fault. I don't think anyone can blame Virgin Australia for doing the wrong thing. It's clearly what was a black swan event, right? So you're just going to help these people adjust, because again, we will come through it. And the way that we help people through this period will be incredibly important once we get through it.
Fantastic. And yeah, CAs is such an important lifeline right now for so many business owners. So really being able to step into that role of support will be really important. So I want to take a little bit of circle back or extend the conversation around growth and thriving in tough times. So, a lot of businesses are doing it tough, but then you often do hear stories of businesses that found a lot of success in the middle of a recession. So Tim, what is some of the examples that you may have seen, or what do you think is really key to the businesses that are able to find success and growth during this time?
I think it really comes down to flexibility, as I was saying before. There's one very good example, obviously, the alcohol producers going to sanitizers, but there's an organization called Wholesale Investor, whom I've known. They started up in the middle of the GFC, and their whole platform is connecting investors to companies trying to raise capital. And it's an online platform, but they do offline events. So they've had events in Singapore, in London, and Australia, and very, very good at what they do. In 3 weeks, they pivoted their whole model to an online model, right? They recognized that, okay, we can't get people together. It's not going to happen in Singapore. It's not going to happen in London. It's not going to happen in Australia. What do we do? And they pivoted the whole model to actually look at online. And, in the first online event that they did, they had 700 people, watching, which was an incredibly fast shift to adapt to the environment. And it's just if you look around everywhere, you can see examples. My local cafe here in Pyrmont in Sydney, they've now produced a whole variety of immunity-based products, based around turmeric and based around natural ingredients and that type of thing. And those things are selling really, really well. And they're doing the takeaway and this type of thing. So it's looking at the actual models that you've got and say, okay, how can we engage with our customers through a digital structure? And how can we instigate change? And I think the key thing that I would say, again, goes back to this idea of what the pain points are for your customers. Is what you can offer a painkiller, or is it a vitamin? And I always remember this, because I'm old enough and ugly enough to have been through the whole .com cycle, perhaps before a couple of you were born, I don't know. But this was in 2000. I was pitching over in Silicon Valley, and there was some big group of investors, and there was this pain in the ass. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say this on a live thing, should I? Sorry. Pain in the bottom, investor who was talking, right? And he kept on saying, is this a vitamin or a painkiller? And that's always stuck with me. Not only because the guy was a bit of a, whatever the appropriate word might be to say, but also it was very relevant. It's always stuck with me that if you have a headache, you need a painkiller right now. Vitamins, those can wait. So it's all about focusing on where the pain points are. Where's the headache? What does a client or You know, what do they need right now? And that's where revenue flows will come from. That's, you know, I don't think it's rocket science, but it's just a question of just being aware and just trying to analyze and say, okay, let's actually explore these avenues. And if it's something that you can leverage your technology to actually go into a new space or something like that, great, go for your life, you know? It's all about where are the pain points. And I think that's probably the key thing I would say.
Yeah, I think those are some great tips. And Matt, I know when we were talking earlier, you also had some thoughts around, you know, understanding the economy that we were in before versus the economy that we're in now and the economy that we're going to be in later and adapting to that. I'm going to get you to just talk to that quickly, but I also just want to let everyone know that it would be a great time for you to start putting any questions in the chat, especially if you've got them for Matt, because he does have to leave in about 4 minutes. So he's going to wrap up a little bit earlier than the rest of us. So if you've got questions, please start putting them in the chat so that we can answer them. But Matt, could you talk us through a little bit of what your thinking was on, you know, how the economy is adapted and how businesses can kind of adapt accordingly?
So like I said earlier, like the economy of the 1st of March, we're never going back there. The economy that we have on the 1st of October or at some point in the future is going to be more digital, more connected, more real time. The relationships that we're going to have, I think of my own job at Xero. I've done over 800 return flights in the last 6 years in my current role for the company, meeting government officials for most of that time. They now do video conferences. So the new normals that we have to think about is the kinds of things we need to adapt to. How can we solve problems for 2021? If you're an established startup, you're trying to solve a problem from 2018 or 2017. What are the problems of 2021? And they're going to be quite different. The other thing to kind of think through in terms of that adapting and changing is ask yourself some questions. We were talking about being aware of the market. It's also about being self-aware. And like, how can you be self-aware of the challenges that you're facing, that your teams are facing right now as they navigate all of this? Because there's so much noise, there's so much emotion in everything. My wife runs a busy advertising agency. We've invested some time to find some positive business stories, some positive business mentors to just listen to. And there's even some awful reality TV shows on Netflix, which are full of optimistic business people solving different problems. They're in strange places. Find as many sources of hope as you possibly can, because those green shoots are going to be that next sort of stage and that next sort of step.
Yeah, those are some fantastic insights. So the last question that I've got for the panel, and then I will go into the audience Q&A as well, is looking at, so you mentioned, I think earlier when we were having a discussion prior to today's panel, is something that came up was capital, and investors are now going to be looking for different things to what they used to before. So Matt, I might just get you to start off, given you've got 2 minutes left before you have to leave. So can you start us off on some of your thinking around how capital raising may change and what investors are looking for may change?
So 2 things. We're probably entering the world is pivoting in terms of the focus of finance or the focus of the recovery, probably away from North America towards this hemisphere or towards Southeast Asia. So digital trade, the ability to sell and market services into a different set of economies is probably really important. But also just think of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were broadly in a post needs society. If particularly in highly developed economies, there was a lot of free capital for lack of a better term, intellectual investment and applications for this new economy. I could now make a lot of money making hand sanitizer, ventilators, and toilet paper. So investors are looking at immediate solutions in part, but then also starting to think about what is that new normal? What are going to be the things that we're going to need more of or less of? If I had to guess, if I'm running a small business, I think a lot of us are going to want to renovate our house when we finally get to come out of it. Having stared at my balcony for the last 6 weeks, I think I've already redesigned how I would want to lay some of these things out. There are millions of people working from home, being idle right now, going, I never want to stare at that wall again. I never want to stare at that piece of furniture again. There's going to be some really interesting, just immediate changes. And then think of the new habits we've got. What are we going to do instead?
Fantastic. Thank you. Matt, I just want to thank you so much for your time, because I know you do have to run, and I will expand on some of those thoughts, but thank you so much for being here with us today. And, you know, we will continue this discussion as well. But look, I think what Matt said was really, really spot on. I think, you know, there is, you know, previously there was so much money in the startup ecosystem, and that meant that, you know, investors were a lot more willing and happy to entertain ideas that were, you know, to put it nicely, higher up the kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. But we have seen that massive shift. So Josh, are you seeing any of that in your clients at all? Like, you know, some of your clients are, you know, no doubt kind of doing not so poorly out of this situation. They might be more needs-based. What are you seeing in your clients in terms of the ones that are kind of finding opportunity versus the ones that might not be doing as well?
Yeah, sure. No problem. It's a hard question because it's hard to give a general sense apart from everyone's getting lean so they think they can build back up later. That's the core of my clients. They've been in business for quite a few years. They're not a 1-2 year business. They've got some maturity. They could be a first generation, second generation business. So that's the core. But just on that sort of my only observation from the capital raising side, just to touch on that is, if you've got a solution that investors want to back and you're a good founder, you will, I guess, fundamentally, you'll still get money. There might be less money around, but you'll still get money. And there's something that I just observed recently with, again, a Melbourne story with Airwallex, which is now a unicorn twice over. They raised, I think, 160 million in their Series D funding round in the last week. So they still managed to raise it in the middle of a coronavirus crisis. So clearly there's still money there, obviously not as much. But yeah, it's hard for me to say. I think broadly speaking, if you're a healthy business before COVID-19 and there's a demand for your business after it, you'll just restructure and build up later. If you were struggling before, then you're probably going to struggle to continue to survive through this period. I think that's
okay.
kind of
and thanks for that. And Tim, do you have any sense on what investors are doing or looking for, where the money's at right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're right in the middle of, or just prior to COVID, we were right in the middle of a raise, and we were getting to the point of due diligence being done and that type of thing, which was great. And we were getting to the point of a couple of term sheets. Now, the market overall has definitely changed compared to 2 to 3 months ago. I think the discussions very much are around traction. It's all about, you know, nobody wants to back, in the current climate, certainly from what I'm seeing, nobody just wants to back an idea on the back of a fact packet, so to speak. It's very much what's the traction, because it's all about risk. At the end of the day, if an investor is choosing to invest in your business, you know, they are putting their money on the line, and you know, they've got to take a classic risk reward structure. If out of every 10 that they invest in, and they've already maybe looked at 100, maybe, you know, even more prior to that, you know, they're going to back what they think are winners. And it's a question of what do they see as a winner? And it's very much about, have you got traction? Does the product that you're creating prove there's a market need? Now, we've been developing a couple of products, and we have a client in an Asian country, one of the largest banks in a smaller Asian country, that literally have verbally said, yes, they want the product, but they're just deferring it because they've got a massive border with China, and the coronavirus they're dealing with in a major way. So it's very much, you know, we've had to taper our expectations. We are rewriting the business plan now, and looking at a couple of products that are geared towards pain points and where we see the market changing and iterating right now. And so it's about taking a bit of a step back and just saying, okay, where can we get the traction? Where can we get the revenues? Where is a model that we're creating? Where's that going to be sustainable? Now, in the long run, our core platform of fractional funding for various sort of products, for various asset classes, was predicated on some elements of regulation coming to the fore. And there's lots of things that were happening prior to COVID-19. But at the moment, we've got governments are in lockdown mode in a lot of different ways. And the last thing they're looking at is regulation. They're focusing on budgets and all this type of thing. So we know that element of our business plan is going to probably delay the timing of when we get the marked revenues coming in. So it's almost as if we've got pre-COVID, this interim phase, and then post-COVID where everything's being sort of shifted about 6 to 12 months. So certainly in terms of the investors, a number have said, look, we love the project. We're just holding fire to see where this is all heading. And I think when you consider other asset classes, I mean, the stock markets globally are very, very weak. As to where they're going to go, nobody really knows, if the truth be told. I think with the other economic shocks that we've got with oil and the subsequent effects that has on the financial markets in terms of if a load of US oil companies go bust, that then triggers a load of debt capital challenges. And government stimuli globally, they've all got to be paid for at the end of the day. So the asset classes that investors are looking at, by comparison, are weak as well. So I think what a lot of investors are going to do, frankly, is they're going to sit on cash and they will wait for the right opportunities, and the valuations that any startup expects are going to be significantly less. I mean, we've had some discussions right now, which have where the discussions have tried to sort of look at a lower valuation than we would have liked. But like anything, a market is determined by what somebody's prepared to pay for something. So it just means it's going to be that much harder, that much longer to find funds, and valuations are going to be lower. And it's all about traction. What can you show as product market fit, and that's really going to be the key.
So Tim, on that note, do you think it's still valuable for if you had intentions of raising or you were in the midst of it to continue just trying to build those relationships and have those conversations, even if you're not happy with the valuations that are coming through, so that maybe in 6 months, 9 months, you can pick that conversation back up? Absolutely,
is what I would say. It's like dating and getting married, right? If you're going to be sort of supporting a business with funding, that's going to be over the medium term. It could be 3, 5, 7 years that you're working with somebody. So, it's all about long-term relationships, and it's always the age-old idea that you never raise money when you're desperate to raise it. That's and maybe that's just the grey hairs of having been through that whole experience historically that sort of helps that. But we've made sure that we've got sort of runway where we don't have to raise money. I would prefer to, because then it enables us to actually achieve a lot more. So it's just going to be a very delicate time. I mean, I would say absolutely build those relationships, because things will come out of this whole crisis, if that's the best way of saying it, that will create new models. And if you're there to actually take a hold of those, you're going to need cash to actually develop those and grow those. And frankly, having been a lender for many, many years, when you come out of recession, that's a situation where so many companies actually go bust as well as going into a recession. So it's, the other sources of finance, like banks, are going to be very, very cautious for new customers completely, I would suggest. I mean, as a banker at that time, when I was during the recession, new clients were vetted incredibly closely. Existing clients, you just you had to work out, are we going to be facing a loss and that type of thing. And so credit becomes tighter. That becomes tighter within the whole economy. Suppliers slow down payment. Customers slow down payments, and it's just We're not even halfway through the financial issues, I think, of what's going to be coming. But the relationships with investors are going to be absolutely critical, because they will have dry capital to invest. I mean, in Australia, there's about $2.6 billion worth of funds that have been raised. to actually go out there. They've got to actually deploy that somewhere, but they're not going to invest it foolishly. So build the relationships and just get traction. Even if you've got very limited staff, you're back to your core staff. Just start getting, do more marketing, get out there, talk to customers, just do what you can to actually just get that traction. And as Josh was saying, if you've got a good team with a good product that has got traction, then money's going to be available.
Fantastic. That was so valuable. And look, so I think we've kind of covered all the questions that I prepared for today, and really all the topics that I think were really, really important to hit on in the context of today's conversation. I really just want to kind of summarize some of the really key points that I really took away from today that I think would be valuable. And the first is, strengthening your cash position is really, really, really important in this time. So what you can do to, just get things on a spreadsheet, as Josh said, just get things on a piece of paper, do some scenario planning, and figure out, how can you strengthen your cash position, because that's even going to leave you in a better position. Even if you were planning to raise, you're better off having cash and not being desperate to raise. So, strengthening your cash position, being really flexible and entrepreneurial. It doesn't matter if it's, not exactly the business that you thought you'd be running, or if it's not exactly the service or the product that you had dreamed of, delivering to the market. You just got to deliver what the market needs right now. And if you can do that, and you can make some, money out of that, then that's really going to help you stay alive in this current environment. And that really is the name of the game. And then the last thing to consider is, potentially pivoting. And, there are businesses that have thrived in this kind of environment. So, how have they done it? They've done it by being flexible, by, learning from, just reading the signals of the economy and saying, where is the money right now? What can I be doing for my clients? And, looking at innovation. And hey, you never know that, that pivot could be what kind of takes your business to the whole new level. So, just be open and be willing to kind of try new things to kind of keep the boat alive. So look, I just want to thank Josh and Tim so much. It was such a valuable session. And
absolute pleasure.
Amazing. So I really, really value your time today. And thank you all of you for joining us. We will be having the recording kind of out in the next week or so. But also, please do check out the virtual resident package that Stone and Chalk has. We've got a lot of, events like this and other support that we're offering startups in our community. And definitely go check out Josh and Tim, and also Matt, who left as well, for additional support or potentially mentorship. So connect with them on LinkedIn, and connect with us at Stone and Chalk on LinkedIn. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.